it's a planned loss or it's not, right? I think it's still unexpected what that outcome of the beginning of grief looks like. For me specifically, in 2019, I took my husband to the emergency room. We thought maybe appendicitis. He was having side pain. And 19 days later, he was dead.
Oh my
So,
God.
in that very rapid period of time, we were exploring cancer. Doctors assumed that it was either a colon or a bile duct cancer. We were never able to make it to the source before he died. And it was zero processing of any of that, of
Yeah.
understanding that he was sick, that he had cancer, that he was dying, that he was dead. It all just happened so quickly. And at the time, I had two young kids. They were 7 and 2. And so
Oh,
I knew that that was going to be my driver moving forward, is making sure that they were okay in all of it. And if they were, I knew I would be.
yeah. Damn. I mean, 19 days is it's almost like it is whiplash. That is a great way to put it. What the process of going into the hospital with something that was like, well, this is probably benign, just quick surgery, scary, but a quick surgery and we're good. Like my nephew had appendicitis, and I remember like my sister going through that and going through that process. But walking into something that felt like, oh, well, we're going to get this taken care of, to I'm going to lose him. And obviously you didn't know when, or like, I'm assuming this progression was just like, we're at 0 and boom, now we're at 100. What was the relationship with you and your husband? And then what was the relationship with yourself as you were like walking through this?
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, when he had said, so he was an auto body painter. So he worked on cars and was very physical every day. It was not an uncommon thing for him to say that his back was sore or this hurt
Mm,
or that hurt. So that morning when he said, I really think we need to go in, and for the lack of our extreme knowledge of appendicitis is, oh my gosh, that's probably what it is.
yeah.
So we both went in there like super optimistic, like this is what it's going to be, and we're going to be home in a few days. We even took the kids to school and then went to the emergency room. When they told us that we had cancer, or he had cancer, I broke down. I kind of lost it. My immediate thought was death. Why, I don't know, but
Mm,
that's where it went. For him, it wasn't. I don't know if it was because of shock or because he saw my reaction, even though I thought I tried to keep it together pretty well. So, hindsight is 2020, and I wish that wasn't the way I reacted, but it was. And then through the rest of that journey, he was extremely positive. He was very grateful for every single person that showed up for him, all the way from the doctors to nurses to the staff that came in to change his garbage can every day. And it was admirable. It was shocking. I privately didn't understand how he wasn't upset, but how I showed up afterwards was really kind of like a job. I can't take a break. I need to just keep
yeah.
moving forward, trying to make smart decisions, listening, making sure that people could see him, he could see people, people knew where to go. I was just in my professional life, I'm a project manager, and
Mm,
that's how I
mm,
showed up. Was exactly that. Here's this person, that person, here's notes, let me tell you the story. It was not fully, I don't want to say as a wife or a partner, as anything, because I was there, but I don't know, it just all felt like a job. I needed to
Yeah.
do a lot of shuffling.
Did you know it was going to be so quick, like after the first few days, or did it kind of like all go downhill once kind of like identified and
Yeah, we were at two different hospitals during this time period. The Friday that we went in, we were there for the weekend, and they released him on Monday morning saying, yes, it's cancer. We'll figure out where. We'll set up an appointment for a scan that following Friday. Then we went home. And again, hindsight's 2020. I wish that home period was very different.
Mm.
But we went home for the rest of that week. And Friday we went in for the scan. He was very jaundiced, and they then admitted him. And that was when he didn't leave. The scans came back all in that, liver, kidney, colon area. And then there was a dot in the lung that was never discussed really after that dot appeared. But then they transferred us to a different hospital. So we took an ambulance the middle of the following week to that hospital. And so I think just that whole journey in both of the locations and all the different staff never said that this was dire and not going to look good until
Wow.
really, I'll say the week before he passed.
wow.
They just kept, let's test this, let's test that, let's see if we can open up these bile ducts, let's get this scan. But I'm so grateful for the staff that we had, because I felt that they were very transparent with us and that they were doing everything that they could from, right, like from the nothing that I knew about any of it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it wasn't, it was short, long, and all the things.
Yeah. Just one long 19 day
Yeah,
day.
19-day.
Yeah. What did you do with the kids?
Thankfully, I had family and a friend of mine who lives on the East Coast. She actually came, and I think at this point she lived here for like a week, 2 weeks during that time, and they took care of them. They only really saw John, I think, twice at the hospital, especially after the transfer. And I'm grateful for that palliative care team, because they equipped John with some of these little snuggle bears, like, the snuggle dryer sheet,
Oh,
the
yeah.
snuggle bear. And he gave those bears to the kids. And those are like prized possessions to them now. But they
That's amazing.
really thought ahead in ways that my head was not at.
Of course.
I have his fingerprints, and I have those bears, and we have clothes made into stuffy bears and stuff. And it's amazing the people that can surround you during that time.
It's so beautiful that you had that. It's not always how it is, I think, with some of the palliative and hospice care. So once you guys are at this other hospital, and you said it was like a week before he passed that everybody kind of started saying, things aren't looking good. Did he get admitted to hospice? What was that last week like?
We were looking at going to hospice external from the hospital. There
Mm-hmm.
were a few locations just within I'll say, mile radius of the hospital. And so that was also why palliative care came, is that pairing, is because things were just changing so quickly. Decisions were just never made. It is something that we obviously weren't prepared for. He was 38 when he died. I 39. And so while people who probably live in that world think of a will and financial trusts and all that stuff. That was not where we were at in our life.
Right.
We didn't have that stuff.
Yeah.
So a lot of this end of life decision was made between myself and then his older siblings. He was one of 7. And so his closest older brother and then his oldest sister, the 3 of us were in powwows frequently talking about what's this and what's that. And I just remember the day that we all were like, I guess this is it. What
Mm.
else can we do? Let's see if we can get John on the same page, or maybe he's already there. And I think he was. He just responded to the 3 of us as he's ready with whatever decision is made, and it's all going to be okay.
Wow.
And we ended up just saying he needs just rest. That was what he wanted. I just want to sleep. I just need rest. And you could tell the amount of pain and everything that he was in. That's the stuff, right? That's burned in the back of your mind. I'll never forget any of that.
Yeah, same.
Yeah, so it was a thing with the 3 of us.
That is so much to have on top of everything you're going through, to have to make those decisions on the fly. Not that there's not decisions to be made, there's always decisions to be made at the end of life, but to not have it like planned out, at least, of like, do we do, life support? Do you want this? Do you want that? What happens with all of this? And like you said, like, it's just not necessarily something that is on top of mind all the time for people, because you just don't think it's going to happen. I mean, my dad, he had lung cancer for a year and a half, 2 years, whatever it was.
Yeah.
And he still didn't do it, even when he was diagnosed. It was literally in the hospital, and he was like barely, coherent and trying to sign documents. But it's like, it is so difficult. And I think there's a lot of reasons why it's difficult. But what did you have fear surrounding that conversation with him? Like, were you afraid to like have to say those words to him, to ask him? Or did you feel like you were just so in the like, I need to like keep moving kind of zone?
Yeah, definitely the latter. It was my job to complete papers and to give responses.
Yeah.
And I think what facilitated that conversation was the paper. I literally read what it said and
Oh,
just
wow.
asked the question of his understanding. Do you understand that? Do you agree? What do you think? And I believe that we had all of those conversations early enough that he fully understood
Yeah.
what answers
Mhm.
on the papers were and what all of it meant. I think the hardest question outside of the life support and all of those was really, what do you want me to do with your body? That was that I think made it real.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And like that became even a whole different world. It was like, oh my God, what do you do with the body? I don't even know the process. You clearly can't walk out of the hospital. So what does happen?
Mm.
Yeah.
And so that then facilitated the very brief conversation we had about the funeral and things like that. But I think that is like what brings tears, is what do I do with your body versus yay to nay or life support, this or that and the other.
That's fucking hell. Yeah. The one thing, well, I mean, there's a lot of things, but something that I'm so grateful for in the process of Ariana dying is, we were, the company I was working for at the time, once she got diagnosed, they paid for us to do our estate planning. They actually paid for it, which was super generous because it is not cheap to do that.
No, it's not.
Those lawyer fees are not cheap. And we got to like figure that all out. And then we bought our plot, which the timing was very bizarre to me because it was like the month before she died or 2 weeks before she died. I can't remember. And I remember doing it, and like we picked out the headstone because she was getting cremated, but they have what's called a green burial here. And we basically have a rock and it has our name on it. And then they put our ashes in the ground in a decomposable bag. So you basically just like go back into the ground. And I remember like going through that, and we like took pictures on the plot and all that stuff. And just thinking like, well, this is, it's good that this is done. But there was some piece about her after having done that she told me. And I am thoroughly convinced that she knew it was coming to an end. And then she was just like
Yeah.
getting all her ducks in the row to do that. But yeah, the idea of like, what do you do with the body is so like daunting. I couldn't handle it. So Ashley's dad and my sister took care of everything for me during hospice. And then after she passed, like I just left. We did it in home and I just left the house. They took care of it. They had the coroner come or whoever. I still don't know what happened. They turned all my cameras off. Like I left, she was in my room. I came back and she wasn't. And
Yeah.
I am eternally grateful for that. But anyways, this process of going through this and then, being at the hospital and then having him pass and then kind of like walking into this new life. What is the initial reaction to coming home for the first time after that?
Yeah, it was interesting because I don't think I processed home without him until probably like a week or so later when my parents left and the immediate community was not here.
Mm-hmm.
But after leaving the hospital, my first responsibility was my kids. And they were at school that day and I picked them up. And all I could think about was I needed to tell them in the church. They go to a private school, and my parents coordinated the priest meeting us at the church. And we went there, picked up the kids, we went to the church, and I told them what had happened. And then we came home where all of their aunts and uncles and grandmas and grandpas were at our house. And it was a nice night, for what it was, right? They were surrounded by everybody they knew and loved, and for that I am extremely grateful. But I do remember thinking, am I grieving correctly in all of this? Because I still had my little project manager hat on.
Yeah.
They make you rush through and talk to the funeral home and get this done and that done. And, it was, it was just like, I got to do this work.
Yeah.
I did immediately get Sophie and I into therapy. So we were with a grief group with a weekend from his passing. And I'm very grateful for that. And both of us have seen therapists all through this time. So, 4.5 years later. Because I just kind of took the mindset of we need tools and fast. Otherwise, we're going to just get sucked up into this space we don't know.
Yeah. I have a question. It might sound weird, but do you feel like you got to say goodbye to him?
Good question. And I think if I'm really being honest with myself, no.
Yeah.
there are times, and it's rare these days, but I will reflect truly back to that day and remember pressing the nurse button saying, I think he's gone.
Mm.
Mm.
I was holding his hand, and then his breathing just stopped. And because I was in project manager mode, I made sure all the family members that were at the hospital could see him and be with him, and that I needed to somehow tell my kids. And what was I going to do with this stuff? What was I going to do with his body? How are we going to move forward from this? I do wish that I would have just like laid in that little bed right next to him
Mm-hmm.
for however long it was going to be. You know, I think those little thoughts pop up every time you see that kind of stuff in movies and TV. Kind of like, damn, I wish I would have done that. But I don't know, right? I don't know.
Yeah, I feel similar. I don't feel like I got to say goodbye. And I don't know if that's just a negativity bias or not, but I remember the first night of hospice. Ariana woke me up in the middle of the night. The family had left because we did hospice at home, and she like could barely talk, and she was like whispering to me like it's time. And in my head, I'm like, what do you mean it's time? Like it's time to sleep. What are you talking about? And she's like, you have to call everybody.
Mm.
So my kids were sleeping in the room with us. I was sleeping on the floor. So I all of a sudden went into that mode, right? Of just like, okay, got to organize this, got to get everybody here. Everybody needs their time to say goodbye. And I called everybody, which was really difficult to get them to wake up. So I'm like pacing the floor of my room on the phone, just calling people. And like my parents are like calling their friends to go knock on my sister's door because they're not waking up. And out of
Oh
the
my
corner
God.
of my eye, and every once in a while, I like turn my head to look on the bed, and I see her saying goodbye to the kids. And I just hear this fucking conversation going on, and I'm like, I'm not a part of that. And like, all I did was like, the rest of the night was like, make sure everybody had their time. And I felt like by the time I did, she just wasn't really present. And it was like that for 5 days. And like, I slowly devolved into this like insanity that I like just wasn't even there. I like wasn't even coping. I would just like, I couldn't believe it was happening. But yeah, like I tore on myself with like, I had so much time to say goodbye and I just don't feel like I got to. You know, it's just a weird thing to like watch your person die, but you're still trying to like take care of them and make sure that everything's handled. Yeah.
I agree 100%. And then I always ask myself, w- would I would there be anything ever different? What
Right.
does that goodbye ever mean, right? Because your person is still there every single day.
That's right.
Yeah. It's also a bit of shoulda, coulda, woulda.
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah. Like if you got like this amazing long goodbye, would it have hurt more, or would it, like I think there's like, I mean, it's kind of goes back to like shit sandwich. Like there's
Yeah, exactly.
good and bad to all of it,
Mm-hmm.
like you got to be, like she wanted everyone to come, and like you were making sure that her final wishes were granted,
Yeah.
in a different spin on that. And I mean, I think it really just depends. Like I didn't go into the room because I was just like, I think we were just talking about this the other day, and I was like, yeah, no. I was like, I'm not going in there. And I just like don't feel any sort of like, oh, I should have, because I'm like, I was 9 years old. Like that was scary as shit. Like I would like, that would just be terrible. I'd have some like, I still could get like a little glimpse of like her laying in her bed in like those final days. And I'm just like, that would like, it would be so scary for a 9-year-old. Like, I'm happy that like in a way that in a way, my last memory is not of her in laying in that bed, like super sick and dying, but maybe laying in that bed and still a little bit sick, but like there. I saw a picture of her I think it was like a month before. Yeah, it was her last April, May. Well, actually, it was 11 months before she passed. And when I saw the photo, I was like, holy shit. And I will like never share it because she looked godly, like terribly ill. And I was just like, I never remember her looking like that. I only remember her like healthy. And I think that I'm like incredibly lucky for that fact, like for that matter.
Yeah, that's beautiful. That's awesome that's the recollection that you have.
Yeah, I think maybe it's just like being a kid, having been a child, and losing her. But I don't know. I'm not quite sure, but I'm definitely fortunate looking back on those photos of her being really sick because I can just imagine like the memories my dad has,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you in a sense relived that with me and Ariana.
Yeah.
And your dad
Yeah.
being there. I mean, you got firsthand what that looked like.
100%. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think I'm grateful for my experience.
Yeah.
If that's
I mean,
as
it's
fucked
good.
up as that sounds.
No, not in these circles. It's not. Oh, man.
You know what I mean?
I do. So you mentioned you got yourself and the children into therapy right away and wanted to learn tools. I actually liked how you said of like learning tools as opposed to kind of like spinning out into this unknown. So what does that first year look like for you in navigating becoming a solo parent to your children and learning tools, understanding your grief? Like you said, you were like, am I doing grief right? Does that question evolve and change in the first year?
I think I don't remember the first year, I guess, if
Yeah.
I'm being honest, right? Like, I think you're just so flying. You're just flying.
Mm-hmm.
And while, yes, I did gain tools and did put them to use, I believe I put them to use. That first year really was, if it weren't for pictures, I wouldn't remember it.
Same.
So it's more like the second year, right, that things really come into play. And the fact that the community that came around you is then evaporated or fully established to whatever it was going to be. I do think the decision that I made to be very present with my kids anytime that they wanted to talk about daddy, whenever, wherever, for however long, is really what kept us moving and kept me moving and created stability and leveraged the tools that we learned along the way. And still to this day, that is still a rule to this day. Wherever we are, even if it's among strangers and they bring him up, we will talk about him. Maybe then that means I have to say, oh, yeah, he's dead.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it matters, and it mattered to them. And there was something about whatever that moment was that reminded them of him.
Does that happen often where they're bringing up your husband?
Yes. And I would say, Sophie was 7 when John died. She is now 12. And Roman was 2, and he is now 7. And so those ages and their developmental growth and the way they understand things have changed. And now the questioning that Roman has is similar to the questioning Sophie had. And so I can see now that Sophie is trying to embrace, I'll say, that rule that I put into place. Roman will bring up daddy, and Sophie will be present with him and talk about it. Yeah, I agree. I think it's really great. And she also then recognizes when it's too much for her because she will say, Roman, I don't want to talk about it anymore.
Wow.
And then, then I'll address it with him later. Do you have more questions about that, or do you want to talk about this thing? Because obviously that is heavy for a 12-year-old. Well, it's heavy for everybody, but for a 12-year-old. So I do think it's beneficial that that still holds true. And it's very applicable to this day. We talk about daddy all the time. And the same things that trigger us, a sound, a smell, a sight, something, is the exact same stuff that hit a kid. Sometimes even worse. All of a sudden she's crying and I'm like, what is happening? Well, it's because somebody said something or she saw something, or it's the reverse for me. We're at the park and she sees a daddy with a kid. Well, I feel sad because there's a daddy with a kid, and she feels sad because there's a kid with a daddy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Did you guys talk about Aunt Nancy a lot, Ashley?
Yeah, all the time.
Yeah.
I mean, it was the same. It was very similar. We went to grief groups and support groups, so maybe that was a tool we both learned. But like celebrated birthdays, like we still celebrate birthdays and angelversaries or whatever you call those days. Even when my dad got remarried, my stepmom's husband died of leukemia the same year as my mom, and we always made it a point to talk about mom and the dad in heaven and all that good stuff. So I think we very much kept them alive.
I struggle with this quite a bit with my kids because we will talk about Ariana whenever it comes up, but there's just so much time that passes between those conversations that I'm
I think that's normal though.
Am I failing? And I ask them, and I'm like, do you guys think about mommy every day or consistently? And they're like, no, not really. And for me, I'm like, oh, but I think about her and talk to her almost probably every single day. So I'm just like, I'm like, am I not doing enough to bring her up? Am I in some way failing them? But I mean, we still celebrate everything. We'll bring her up, or if there was some food and one of my children was just like, oh, that reminds me of mommy. But yeah, it's something I think about pretty often of what is it supposed to look like?
I don't think there's a supposed to. I think it's just because there's definitely, there was 6 of us in the house, and I don't think we talked about her every day. Her pictures and her Mackenzie Childs that she liked to collect were in the house. So there was still pieces of her, even though we became had a new family join our family, and there always has been and there's pieces of her in terms of I have some of the Mackenzie Childs that she had in my house, or so I don't think it's also not always always talking about her, but it's I don't know, I go to strain the pasta and it's in the Mackenzie Child things, and I'm like, oh, that's nice. It's just a reminder, it's just that nice reminder when you're doing just kind of everyday things. And, they are kids. I think sometimes it's like you said, until there's the dad and the daughter on the swings, they're kind of going about life. And to be fair, they probably forget about her even if she was here because they're going about life a little bit.
That is true. Kids will be kids.
No, I mean that lightheartedly in the sense as they grow up, it's they're so entrenched in their different activities. It's not until mom can't be at the cheerleading competition that it kind of I feel like it hits. But even as I've gotten older, I'm people oh yeah, I went to Target with my mom, and I was like, oh, I went to Target by myself because my mom's dead. I don't go to Target with my mom. I don't know what that is. I don't know what getting pedicures with my mom is like. I go by myself. Those are the times I think as well as I've gotten older, but even there's kind of similar situations from when I was a kid that it really actually you kind of felt it.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Eventually it becomes the norm.
Well, yeah, the new normal, right?
Yeah.
So has that question then, when you were questioning yourself, if you were even grieving, right? How has your relationship to that question changed over the years?
I've done so much reading and talking with people and have accepted that grief looks different for everybody and there's no right or wrong. And so that is not a question I ask myself anymore, and
That's
haven't
great.
for a while. I think, the more and more that we have conversations about it, it then becomes the norm. I mean, that was initially the reason that I reached out to you, CJ, is because it's not often that you see men willing to talk about their stories and be vulnerable. And so that was something that intrigued me, was like, how are you going about this? Everybody that I've kind of talked to has been a female, that your story still is very similar, obviously, yet very different from mine.
Right.
And all of it is still okay.
Yeah, that's right.
So it's I think, yeah, the more it gets brought up and talked about, all the better,
Yeah.
especially because it's something we all will go through probably multiple times in various levels and depths and ranges and all of that stuff, that it's really as common as a birthday, and a birthday is acceptable to talk about.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So should death.
Yeah. 100%.
Yeah, I agree. And I think what comes up for me is permission. We need to have permission to just grieve in the ways that we need to, right? Like there's obvious like ways that are destructive that I think like we can all agree on, but outside of those few things, I mean, you have to trust yourself and how you are going to progress through it, because even what is right for you in the first 6 months may not be right in the next 6 months, or maybe the first year or the second year. Like things that needed to get you through that felt right for you, and if you have kids or whatever it is, like you have to continuously check in with yourself and give yourself permission. And I think that was one of the greatest gifts that Ashley's dad, my uncle, gave me. He's just like, you have to trust yourself that you're going to do what is right for you and your kids. Because I don't know, Angela, if you had this experience, but it seems like everybody has an opinion on how I'm supposed to grieve.
Mm-hmm.
And I can't please everybody, because if I do one thing, some people are like, that's amazing, good on you. But there's other people who are like, how could you possibly do that? That is horrible and terrible. And you're just being like, I mean, it blew my fucking mind that so many people had an opinion on how I'm supposed to live my life post loss. Did you have that experience as well?
Yes, but I'm grateful that it wasn't, I think, to the extremes that I've heard other people experience it.
Mm,
Overall, I do think that the community that surrounded me was very accepting, or at least neutral enough.
yeah.
Yeah.
I've heard people talk about some really awful things. I've heard maybe, oh, he's in a better place. I think that's, there's the standard, and people always think that they have to say something.
Yeah.
And so that is, things that I've learned, right? I show up differently in other people's grief now as well. And that's the blessing. But yeah, there were definitely a few people that questioned my actions or thoughts,
Yeah.
but I'm grateful that it wasn't, like the main folks, the main characters
Yeah.
in that group. Yeah.
It really like it seriously like boggles my mind that in this situation, in this moment, that people are judgmental. Like there's so many things that you like. I mean, being judgmental is not acceptable, but like there's so many things in the sense of like, oh, I've been in that situation. I wouldn't do it this way, and it's like, okay, well, you were in that situation, fair play. But like literally, all of the people that have like that cast their opinions or like have never experienced this before. And it like seriously boggles my mind. Like anything else, like why I took a certain job or why I didn't, or why I put flowers in the front garden and not vegetables. Like, I don't know. Like, I'm just like, why the hell do you think that you can speak about this? Like, or cast your judgment on that? It's like the one thing. And you're just like, is it coming from a place of like genuinely you like just don't know what to say? And it's like, well, in that case, really say nothing. Like, honestly, I'd rather you
right.
I'd rather you be like, she's in a better place than
exactly
like judge the way in which I'm like grieving or whatnot. Like, come on. That is like, I mean, like CJ, like that letter you got, I'm just like, what the fuck? Like wild. Because literally the thought of losing like my spouse, I don't even have kids yet. And I'm like, I don't even think I could get out of bed. I don't even think I would get out of bed. Like, how the fuck am I going to like judge someone for what they're doing or not doing?
I know. It boggles the mind. It truly does, because you would think death brings so much perspective and patience and support. But the other side of that is judgment and you should and you should not, which is so damaging in some instances, and I think there is, I mean, like you said, I don't remember the first year. I think I do, but it's almost like a dream. And I was sleeping 2, maybe 4 hours a night for a year. Like just that alone, on top of everything else, on top of like crying every day, on top of like trying to take care of the house and the kids and work and do all this, your brain is not functioning at all. At all. It's like complete survival mode. So yeah, it's just really, really bizarre, but I'm glad that you had a better experience with that. I think it speaks to making sure that we surround ourselves and almost insulate ourselves with the right community. For me, like it was really hard to be around the people who knew me in Ariana. I almost needed to be with new people who had no idea of who I was before with Ariana. They didn't really know the situation unless I told them. There was something about being around the folks who knew that life or who were a part of it that just made it really, really hard for me.
That's interesting. Is it because they would always keep asking how you were and bringing up like, woe is me? Or what do you think is the reason that was?
I think if I try to reflect on it with a clearer mind, because there is this identity crisis that happens when we lose our person, where, we die with them and now we have this new thing that exists. It almost just felt really uncomfortable to have to pretend that I was still the same person while I was like trying to expand and understand what was happening, because I didn't even realize this identity crisis until later. I didn't know that this was happening. Nobody told me that this was a thing in grief, but I've heard over and over from people that it's the same thing for them. And I think it just became that hard reality of like, well, I'm isolated. I don't really fit in here and I don't know who I am, but you guys think you know who I am. So let me just like go be with new people and like form new relationships and see who I am, and I ended up finding a good community who became very supportive. But yeah, that was a challenge for me in the beginning stages. And now like I've come back into that community that I had before, to the core of it. And it's much better now.
Interesting. Yeah, I can see that. That's fair. I too went through that self-discovery journey and needed to redefine myself
Yes.
outside of a wife. You still, of course, yes, a mother, a sister, a friend, etc. But there was more to me, in going through some of that work. I've now given deeper descriptions. I
Yeah.
am much more compassionate and empathetic and a much better listener and can, think even more logically probably than I could have before. Things like that I now would describe myself as. Though I would say that I probably still wear my widow badge proudly because I think that's just some strong shit. That
Mm,
is
Yeah.
like way up there. That yeah, it totally sucks, but I'm pretty proud of where I'm at right now.
mm.
And so that feels like still a good descriptor for myself. And I know there are some people that don't like to use that word and it feels weird, but for me it feels not like that scarlet letter, right?
Yeah, I think that's beautiful. I'm the same. At my best, I'm the same, where I kind of wear it proudly, and I have no shame about it. And I think it is a a good descriptor, and it also helps us find our people faster too. At my worst, I think, well, I'm just completely fucking broken, and this widow badge is part of what broke me. And I'm
Yeah,
like
fair.
irrecoverable, unlovable, and fucked up, and I should avoid all people at all times. But yeah, I definitely think there is something to be proud of in it. I think the depths of our despair is also a reflection of the love that we had, which, I'm grateful for too, because the reality too is that not everybody who loses their person had that kind of love, right? Like I've met
True.
folks who are just like, yeah, it didn't really, I think we were kind of on the brink of divorce, and that's a whole nother kind of grief, like, because it's
Absolutely.
still going to be fucking devastating in a whole
Yeah.
different way, a whole new layer.
Mhm.
So you are 4.5 years out now. What does life look like for you? And what would you say has changed since losing your husband?
Life, I'll say, is pretty standard, right? My kids go to school and they're in their activities. I've experienced further grief in those 4.5 years. I've lost a pet, I've lost a job.
Mm,
And so it's really given me even further moments of reflection and redefinition to what next could look like. I've been able to reflect deeper and recognize that those things that I now define myself as, or in addition to, show up in my professional life. Being a project manager and having those great empathetic and passionate skills, I think only make me stronger
yeah.
because I can look at a situation very differently and almost in a way that matters more because we are all human. I think obviously my goals look a little different. I feel like I stand a little bit taller
Mm,
in what they could be, pushing myself in areas and not being quite as scared of what next could look like. But I do think I reflect melancholy in what could have been as the four of us as a
yeah.
family. I still think, well, if, we were both here, this is where we would be living, or this is what we would be doing. And I don't hate that I think that, but it it does suck because it will never be. And some of it's like, well, how do I make that happen? Or is it okay that I don't want to make that happen anymore? And so that I think is still a funny, yucky feeling.
Yeah, that's a challenge. I will have moments where I like, whether it's a painting that I have hung up of Ariana's, or I mean, actually in the studio here, I have all of our photo collage from the funeral, or just something that like reminds me of her. And I'll just like look at it and I'll just be like, what the fuck? What
Hmm.
the fuck? I'm like, you're
Hmm.
supposed to be here and you're not. And like your kids are suffering because of it. And I'm fucking suffering because of it. I don't want this life. I don't want to fucking do this shit anymore. Like, this just sucks. I definitely still have those moments too, where it's like that reflection of like, well, you know, this is the contrast to what life is like versus what it used to be. We used to all sit at the table and have dinner together. And now most of the kids are gone and with their friends, or it ends up being like me and my daughter sitting down watching TV and eating, you know, like that's kind of the reality of what life is. But then you have to like take in the context of like, yeah, but the kids are also in a different state. Like they were young when she was here.
Yeah.
They're teenagers now. Like, so what would that have looked like? Would it have stayed the same? What would have been like? It's just this big old like mind fuck of like thought experiments that lead to just me saying, damn it, Ariana, like,
Yeah.
fuck this shit. You
Yeah.
know? Yeah. So I definitely relate to that, but
That's so true. I think my kids' anger is very much like my husband's. So I always joke, damn, John, you should be dealing with this, not me.
Yes. That's awesome. 100%. Yeah, I love that. My daughter is so much like my wife. It's crazy. Like the looks that she's given me now, the way that she like treats me or like jokes with me, like once in a while, like catches me off guard where I'm like, oh my God, what the fuck? I'm like, that face is exactly the face that your mom used to give me. And then, you know, it's a moment where we kind of laugh about it too. But yeah, it's very interesting to see their personalities come through so powerfully in those moments.
Yes.
But speaking of like their personality, if you are willing, would love to hear maybe one of your favorite memories with your husband.
We honeymooned in Australia and Fiji, and that will probably still forever and ever be the best memories. The fact that we were in this place that I thought I could never ever go to, and we just did because why not? It was our honeymoon, and what is debt anyway? Yeah, I think that, and I remember, you know, how proud he was after each kid was born. He loved being a dad. I think that's also like what gutted me initially. It was like, this is the part of life you wanted to be in.
Yeah.
And he was so good at it. He was a kid himself. And so those I reflect fondly on. He, you know, he loved his kids.
We are appreciative for you being here. I feel like we could talk forever and ever and ever about it. I'm glad that you reached out, that we connected. It is always good to have a conversation with you. Actually, what's your husband's name? We forgot
John.
to ask. John. I had John in my head too. I don't know why. Did you?
Did I not say it? I thought I did, but
you must have told me
weird.
before, like when we talked off of this, because I had John in my head and I don't know why. But anyways, yes, thank you so much for coming on, sharing John, kind of sharing your journey with grief. And I think it's always amazing to hear yet another story and hear some of the things that are different and hear some of the things that are similar. And, you know, grateful for you for being willing to do that.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm grateful you have a platform to be able to talk about it and share and create further community and help to make it norm.
Thank you for listening to this episode of The Day After. You can find this podcast and more at our website at www.thedayafter.com. If you enjoyed this episode, we'd really appreciate if you could take a moment to leave us a review wherever you listen to your podcasts.